Hello and welcome to the Smooth Scaling podcast, where we talk with industry experts to uncover how to design, build, and run scalable and resilient systems. I'm your host, José Quaresma, and today we have Usman Mir with us. He's the SRE team lead here at Qt and has been working for over 10 years in automation and multi-cloud solutions. We had a great chat about the considerations and challenges of implementing hybrid cloud solutions and multi-cloud solutions. A highlight for me was the different stories and experiences that he shared. Enjoy. Welcome, Usman. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you for having me. It's going to be good to finally sit down with you for more than just a couple of minutes at a time.
That's true. And so, of course, for the listeners out there, right? So I've actually had the privilege of working with you before both of us joined Qt right back in our consulting lives. And it's actually a pleasure to both having you on the podcast and also to talk about this topic, which is multi-cloud and a hybrid cloud, and something that we worked quite a bit with back in the day. Happy to delve into that again.
Yeah, so some of our old stories together, as well as the things we did a little bit apart while you were off for new adventures, and I was dealing with multi and hybrid cloud situations. So yeah, it would be fun to reminiscence as well as talk a little bit about what has been going on here, and maybe also into considerations of where we want to take Qt in the future.
Awesome. So let's get started. Maybe before we go into the topic, into multi-cloud, can you share us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I've always been someone who has loved IT. So I grew up with the Commodore 64. So back when you actually borrowed books from the library, especially computer games books, where you actually took every page and coded it into your BASIC, and yeah, all the way to becoming an IT professional 15 years ago, starting out as a Java developer, moving into a little bit of consultancy, as well as slowly witnessing the transition of when servers used to be in some client's closet or in their private data centers to migrating that to the what we would call modern cloud, or back then, they still started out as data centers that had that branding. And then seeing, well, how technology evolved from, well, how do you deal with hosting services for clients when they're on physical machines to virtual machines, and then moving into the new containerized world that we now live in.
That's a good journey for following all that progress. Exciting. And let's start with kind of multi-cloud. I mean, I sometimes still get confused. There's multi-cloud, there's private cloud, there's hybrid cloud. Can you try to help us a little bit with some very quick definitions or some kind of finger rules for kind of what is what?
So it is a word that has been abused a lot in general, cloud, because cloud, what is cloud? Cloud in its basic essence is still just a data center, but it has this buzzword where we say we are using the cloud. That usually means that you're using some cloud providers who can come up with some compute resources, perhaps some software as a service for your business to actually put in your business logic and run your business on. Now, that one cloud can, of course, be distributed, so you have some form of reliance there. You can have it in different regions. However, you're still relying on a single cloud provider. Also, you still have solutions that are running in your old school data centers. It could be that you are in an industry that is highly regulated, or there are some legal terms that do that you are not allowed to put it into a public cloud. That would be, your old school data centers. And so there is a lot of, is that actually a cloud? Yes, kind of, because you can also use the same technologies, that cloud native technologies on your local data center, but that wouldn't really be a public cloud. So we have to introduce, public cloud and private cloud as terms. Yeah. Now, multi-cloud, you could say that, hey, I'm using multiple solutions in one cloud provider. That's not really multi-cloud, even though you're perhaps hosting it in different locations within that cloud provider's availability zones. That is not something that I would define as multi-cloud. That would still be using a single cloud. However, when you're using multiple cloud providers that have their own infrastructures, then we can dive into the term, well, then you're actually using multi-cloud. Whether you have it's the same application that is spanning those different clouds, or it's different sets of your business applications that are running on each, that's more of, nitpicking. And of course, going back to the example with having something still running in a private data center, if you actually use that as well as a public cloud and integrate them somehow, then I would say that you're actually running a hybrid cloud setup.
Okay, I think so. We kind of private and public cloud. It's more around kind of who has access to that data center or to resources in the data center. Then multi-cloud is kind of how many providers are you relying on, and then you add a hybrid, as in are you having applications that are crossing in between that barrier between your private cloud and a public cloud?
Yes. Yeah. And again, these terms are a little bit stretchy, so you can have that your application can be completely separated depending on which cloud they are, or you can have services or your services that are dependent on microservices from various external parts. So again, these would be the rough definitions of it, but there's always, there was always a little bit leeway of saying when are you multi-cloud, when you're a hybrid cloud, and things like that.
Okay. Has anything changed in the last years? I mean, is there any trend on how to use them? How often do we see customers and companies really on multi-cloud? Has anything changed there?
Yes. So, and this goes for both the hybrid cloud concept as well as the multi-cloud concept, because we saw when cloud was first booming that there was a huge push to get everything off your private data centers, reducing your CapEx and moving everything to OpEx and pushing it towards some of the cloud providers. And that has a lot of benefits. You have your scalability. You don't have to manage your hardware. You can, refocus on more focus on your actual business cases. However, it does come with the caveats that now there is coming legal frameworks that actually determine what you can actually put out there. You also have some consideration in regards to cost, because just because you have moved everything away from CapEx doesn't mean that it's always optimal for that. Okay. So the hybrid cloud scenario is an interesting one, especially in these very delicate times where there is both political turmoil as well as legal frameworks coming in, especially here in the EU, where there is very strong data protection laws. So there is very much a push to actually pull out of the public clouds and make more hybrid cloud solutions where you're not putting in data that could be sensitive into the public cloud. Now, multi-cloud. Well, again, there are several good reasons for actually taking such an approach. And I've seen that companies are realizing that there is actually a good reason beyond just, we're using cloud. This can be anything from financial, because using a cloud provider can maybe lock you into some contracts or financial situations where you say, hey, we don't really have a good options to go out of here, but we have to keep paying these terms that we originally signed on. So there can be an incentive to actually spread out across clouds that might be specialized in different ways, where you can take different offers into consideration. Then there is also the aspect of which cloud providers are you using? Are you using some that are within regulations of foreign nations that might come in and block you from optimally using your cloud provider, or you can risk that some of them are ordered to deliver your sensitive data to their governments. So you might want to go for a multi-cloud solution where you're also using something that is within your sovereignty. Then there is the question of reliability, which when we're speaking today, we just saw a big incident happen with Cloudflare yesterday. And I would say from my perspective, that has been probably the most relevant for the clients that I've seen in my consulting days, is that people are very much focused on that, hey, cloud is not reliable. even the biggest hyperscalers are actually not up all the time. And then it becomes a evaluation of, are we actually able to take the loss of relying on a single cloud compared to what it would cost us to have either a cold setup in a different cloud provider, or maybe run with a hot setup.
And can you maybe, before we can you maybe explain a little bit a cold setup and a hot setup? How does that work?
So if you have a service and you want to host it in different setups, so different clouds, you could, of course, have it like you have it only active on your main cloud while you're taking backups and having a recovery feature being available on your secondary cloud, which is not active. So it's not burning off your money on compute resources. It might just be using whatever it takes to take backup storage. It might have some reserved instances that are shut down and not costing you too much. While a hot setup is that you are basically running your services on both or multiple clouds at the same time. And maybe you're load balancing between them, or you're directing specific client users to specific clouds. So there can be various strategies and reasons to use that. It could be that in one region of the world, you are hosting on one specific cloud provider, but in a different region of the world, you're using another cloud provider entirely. Again, this could be price reason, this could be political or legal reasons.
With a lot of things, and we've also in the previous episode of the podcast, we also talked about resiliency and kind of it feels like there's also a strong balance to be thought about here in terms of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, which is kind of back to how much risk are you willing to take, and how much, I guess, on the other side, you could argue that how much time and money are you willing to put into reducing that risk, and how much do you want to reduce it, right? It feels like this is a big part of when looking at hybrid and multi-cloud, that's a big part of the consideration is how much are you willing to invest time and money to have the kind of to reduce the risk to acceptable levels, right? Then there's the definition of what is an acceptable level, right? Having a cold setup will be cheaper, but then I guess it would take longer than if you were hot to recover, right? Or to get the system up and running again, right? So is that something that you've seen often, kind of having those discussions?
Yes, because in the end, it all comes down to, at least for the private sector, it's very much a cost exercise. So it's really about, well, what does it cost us to run a resilient setup versus having a risk? And that risk, how much would that cost us if there is a disaster? And what is our recovery time from that disaster? So in the end, it is about making that cost exercise, going in, analyzing how long can your business be out of order, to what degree, compared to the cost of having either a hot or a hot-cold setup. But when we then move away from just, private business and move into, for example, public sector or private business that has to live up to certain legal requirements, for example, financial sector might be one of them, then you also are, having to consider what is the legal framework for that your business can exist at all, because there might be, especially here in the EU, there are actually regulations in place as well as regulation coming up that will impose stricter resiliency demands on your business to have in place, especially financial institute.
When we're talking about kind of hot setup and hot-cold, I guess part of it is also the portability aspect of your system, right? So I guess in a multi-cloud setup, if you really want to run hot, ideally you do have a fully portable setup that you just can deploy to one cloud and to the other and just run. How do you see that? Because I think we have been discussing this in the IT world for a long time with containers and then with Kubernetes. And are we really there, or is it also a matter of to really get there, there's also some cost?
So from a technical perspective, the options are there, but it is something that every business has to take into consideration of how much of their legacy frameworks they need to modernize. And this is unfortunately not trivial. because there is a lot of technical depth that might go into any product that a business runs that would not be easily transferred over to an optimal containerized environment.
Yeah.
But it is where everyone is moving towards. And we are seeing it more and more that everything is being containerized. There's still some holdouts. I would say that I'm shocked to this day that there's still some recommendations of very fundamental software where the recommendation is not containerization, where whoever of consultancies or third-party vendors I see that are still running off more old school. Sure, it's still virtual machine, and you can still image that. You can still, build up your whole deployment process and configuration so you can get up and running as quick as possible. But it's still not mired in old school ways of doing it and mitigating issues, rather than taking advantage of the more cloud-native technology that we are using, like containerization. But I would expect that we will move towards going fully containerization within the upcoming years.
Is there anything missing to really get to that place? I guess I don't know if it's this ideal world of fully portability within containerization. I guess I feel like the tools are all out there. Then the question is, are you willing to? Some of them you do have to pay for, right? So is that where we are, or do you think there's more progress to be made?
It is a more of a, again, time and cost perspective, because there is the matter of training your experts to get to a level where because they're expert in what they've been working on for several years. However, cloud native technologies like containerization, while it has been here for some years, it's still a new technology. It's a new way of doing things. So there can be a lot of holdout, and it can simply just take time to take your old way of doing things and deploying things and moving it over. So it becomes, again, a cost exercise in, do you want to invest in using more modern technologies? Do you want to invest in solving the issues? Because I'm not going to lie, it's not going to be without issues to taking applications and containerizing them if they've never been built for that. Yeah. Also, you have to distinguish between, do you have something that is stateful or stateless? Stateless, that's easier for us to just containerize and run that. But if you have to manage state, and meaning that you have to have something that saves data, it becomes a little bit more complicated, especially when we're dealing with something that has to be distributed or multi-cloud, because you want to make sure that your state or your stored data is available to any location that you might be deploying to or serving from. And then we're dealing with physics with, hey, you have X amount of data and it needs to be available in Y amount of places within Z amount of time. So are you able to, make sure that that replication happens in a latency friendly enough time, depending on your application? Are you able to be able to survive that some regions go down and you might have a little bit of conflict? Have you thought that into your architecture? So it is a process that we will get to. I see all businesses moving towards that, but it's not trivial. No.
Very, very interesting. And maybe we'll talk quite a bit about containers. How do you see then I think a big, as I see it, an important leg of this whole multi-cloud or something enabling it is also all the automation. So kind of more the DevOps world or side of things and the way of thinking, as well as you were sharing. How do you see that kind of the DevOps? Do you see that as a requirement for multi-cloud? How do you see that those interacting, if you will?
So I would say it's not a strict requirement, because IT people will find some hacky solution and make it work for them. And basically that's what we do. We find a solution to make life easier for us, even though we might spend enormous amount of time doing some automation for something that would only have taken us 5 minutes to do. But it is something where it's being refined. So Sure, you might have your old school Jenkins setups that are deploying through a pipeline, and then you have to manually copy. I still see that in some. I've seen that in companies where the process is basically, yes, we'll compile this on this server, and then we'll zip it, and then manually copy it over to these servers, and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are also moving towards more modern development pipelines where we're simply, pushing things from there. But again, it takes time. Then there's also the mentality of, well, should we be pushing this manually, or should this be automatic by some GitOps approach where you're maintaining your state and having an application ensure that your live state is reflected on your configuration. So yeah, there is a lot going on there, but I'm seeing companies in various stages of where they are. Again, it is something that is coming. I don't think we can avoid it, which is a good thing because it also reduces error, as far as I've seen.
Yeah.
It will introduce a lot new errors, but at least it will reduce the errors that we're seeing with a lot of the manual processes and more old school push processes.
So if we have someone out there listening and they're maybe they're in one cloud, or maybe they are still on data center or private cloud potentially. So how would you, kind of getting a little bit to the how of multi-cloud, right? So what would you tell them? So how would you suggest that they go about kind of considering a multi-cloud or hybrid cloud approach, and then kind of how would they go about it? I mean, do you have any? Is there? I know it's. I'm asking about a very complex process, and it's not very easy maybe to summarize. But are there any main pointers that you would share when people start thinking about it?
Well, first of all, it comes down to making an analysis of what do you have and what would it cost you to, or are you even able to move this setup that you have currently to another data center, just to see, hey, if we have a one-to-one move, can we even do that? Because that would be, the first thing to consider. Then there is the question of, all right, are we in a phase where we want to modernize our infrastructure stack as well as our application stack? Because then it makes it easier to consider we might be moving technologies anyway, so let's ensure that the new technology that we choose is something that is more cloud native. Once you then have identified those areas, and I would probably do it iteratively. Yeah. So, everyone wants to, take the whole block of your services and application and move them over. That's optimistic. You will have to, take it in an iterative approach, identifying the easy wins about, well, here we can containerize this and create a service from that.
Yeah.
Great. Let's for a time run a little bit of a hybrid architecture where we still have something running on old school virtual machines or even bare metal. And some of it we might be putting into containers and running as services alongside. So a step-by-step analyzing that. And of course, in the end, every project fails if you don't take the economics into consideration. So yes, you want to go to, the ivory tower of everything is containerized, self-healing, no-touch operations, all that. But it's not a easy journey. It's not a trivial journey because there is a lot of time that must be spent into making sure that every little bit of your business still is resilient and is working. No. So, yes. Sorry, it wasn't a good answer, but it isn't something that you can just one size fits all.
Oh. And I mean, I think it was a good answer. It's also very, I guess it's hard to make it in simpler terms when it's such a complex issue as well, right? But one thing then when thinking about multi-cloud is, I guess we touched a little bit upon it, which is kind of the vendor lock-in part, right? So do you think that that's something that people should also be considering from the beginning? And where do you see kind of the main pros and cons of that? Of avoiding it, maybe?
Yes. So vendor lock-in is, especially for the cloud, has become a serious problem when you unfortunately have to take into consideration that it's not only technical issues that might be plaguing your business. There might be very much these days political reasons to be able to move out of a specific cloud to another. So that means that the way that you design your new infrastructure to run the cloud should be portable from the start if you're starting on that journey.
Yeah.
So you should have a plan where you move, sure, iteratively, but move towards implementation that is easily migratable from one cloud to the other. And fortunately, the technology that we're using these days with containers, Kubernetes, things like that, it is from the start very portable. Sure, there might be the last couple of percentages that you need to reconfigure or remodify because you're using another vendor or another solution and things like that. But we're not where we were 10 years ago, where we were heavily locked into specific ways of doing things.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I think you mentioned maybe the last percentage point, maybe they will never be fully portable, right? Because then I guess there's also a balance in those as well that, okay, maybe if I go to something that is less portable and more specific to a specific cloud provider, maybe you get a better performance or better cost in that area. But as long as you are conscious of that and know what's the cost of moving and where you would move it to if you'd have to move to a different cloud, I guess you'd be in a good place, right?
Yes. And you will have to accept that the solutions that each cloud provider provides are not equal. Sure, they might be feature completely equal, but in most cases, there will always be, hey, we offer this little bit of extra bonus, or we're a little bit better than the other guys. So it's going to be like a little bit of pros and cons, but we are in a fortunate state where if you're using more cloud native technology, it should nearly not matter. Again, it will be the last percentages. And of course, one thing that might be of a concern is how locked in are you with a specific cloud vendor's own managed services, and do you need to start working out solutions where it is more independent of those? Yeah. Because not all cloud providers will have the same amount or the same types of managed services.
I think that's some good points to think about when I guess starting this journey, or if for people even in this journey that might want to kind of are they thinking about all those different things? You said you've been in this world for 15 years, maybe not in the container world, but in this IT world. Would love to hear some. Do you have any kind of specific stories that come to mind? Maybe we could start of things done in a very good way. Some really good examples of something, either a migration towards cloud. Anything that comes to mind?
Well, there are a couple of stories. Let me see how I can frame them in a way so we can actually talk about them, because
that's fair.
A lot of times this is a process that has had a long time underway. So I've been part of deliveries where we had to look at where are the client today, how much work is it. And it's about, well, for example, taking, telecom. They might be wanting to, utilize that, hey, we have some services we're using. Of course, we're hosting it ourselves, but we might have a couple of things where we're not able to deliver that ourselves. But for our clients, we need to also have our management service run on something where they want it locally or in a region-restricted cloud vendor. Yeah. So we had to take into consideration of our architecture to see, all right, where are you today? Oh, you're running old school virtual machines. Let's take a look and see what do you have here. So step by step, what we did was we identified each of their application stacks, how much it was, something that they had homebrewed. That makes it a little bit easier for us, to help them transition towards a more container-based environment. But then we also had to take into consideration they were also using software bought by a vendor, and that wasn't supported in a containerized manner. Yeah. And they might not be in compliance with the licensing if we just containerize that. So yeah. So the approach was kind of a hybrid approach where we couldn't take everything and containerize that. However, what we could do was to take that application, split out the parts where we either had the license or it was self built, containerize that, put it onto a Kubernetes cluster in the two targeted environments that we were going for, and then seeing, well, all right, can we take this old school application stack and redeploy that to these two data centers? I would say it was that due to some requirements, it could only land in one center, and we had to create a connectivity between the various services that were hosting the other cloud. But we did manage to get through after quite some time. But yeah, again, it wasn't trivial because it wasn't only technical concerns that we had to deal with.
I think that's often the case. One could argue that maybe the technical side is maybe the easy side. There's all the constraints and that's maybe putting it a bit too on an exaggeration. But yeah. One thing from still in the kind of the stories and experience, I think one of the things that I was kind of thinking about multi-cloud and hybrid cloud in my experience as well. And one of the things that I remember being talked about is kind of from a hybrid cloud perspective, this idea that you can have the best of both worlds, right? That you have the kind of the application running with kind of a baseline in terms of from a load perspective, right? That you have that running in your private data center, but then when you have peaks, you kind of in a very smooth and automatic way extend the resources you have by leveraging the public cloud. So have you ever seen that really work? Because I've heard about that quite a bit, but I've never experienced that myself. So I'm just curious if you've seen that.
So I haven't seen a solution that where you have done it that specifically. However, I have helped design such solutions that unfortunately weren't put into practice due to other reasons. But it is very much about being able to detect your incoming load and then making sure that you direct it correctly. Because you can always just put a cap on what you're directing towards your private data center where you have limited scalability, and then directing the rest of your traffic towards the public cloud where you can, scale up as much as you want. But again, you have to consider your stateful data and ensuring that that is consistent across, especially if you have an application where the user itself is not tied into a specific cloud location. Because there are some types of implementations where it's basically a little bit more random where you end up. So unless you can, lock that specific sessions end up in a specific data center, and that is doable. It does take a little bit of consideration into, we have to make sure that this is directed, but do you then want those clouds to be completely independent so that they have their own data sets that are not dependent on each other? And maybe you do some post-processing on, a copy of that. Yeah. So in this case that I was dealing with, unfortunately, there were some other ramifications that put a stop to it. But these were some of the concerns we had to think of is, well, all right, do we keep the data separate or do we have a hybrid cross-region approach here?
And so maybe starting to wrap up a little bit the episode here. So one thing that I would also like to ask you about. So you've joined Qubit now 3 months ago?
A little under 3 months.
Just under 3 months, right? Maybe a little bit within this area, right? But is there anything new that you've already learned since you have joined, or something that you had to unlearn since you have joined? Anything comes to mind?
Well, every time you join a new project, you have to take into consideration what is the history of the place. Why are things done in the way they are? Even if you come up and say, hey, I've seen this been done, in a more newer way or a more, what you would personally consider a better way. But you still have to take into consideration, there is actually historical reasons for why it's done like this. Yeah. Sure, we're not using, some of those modern processes that I've seen in other projects. But there's actually very good reasons for this. There might be, tied up to specific implementations that are running very well. They're supporting a lot of clients, end users, and things are just running optimally, and messing around with that can break a lot of things. So it is something where I have to, take a step back, take a look at, all right, this is done like this. Great. I want to get to a place that is, improvements on that. How do I make the plans that we move towards that? Yeah. That might be something that is done over maybe a couple of months, or it might be something where I say, all right, we have to take it in an approach where we, in a year or two, are closer to having that maturity. But again, maturity is also a relative term because it has to support not only the business processes, but also ensure that your development departments are following along with that. Because in the end, it's their product that has to be supported by a platform team. And it can't be that the platform team is driving how the development team is designing the product, but they can influence how to support it.
Yeah. And I do know that kind of cloud and multi-cloud is something that you're thinking a lot about these days, and maybe doing some work on. I hope that in a few months I'll be able to invite you again, and I think I can do that to so that you can come back and share a little bit more about maybe our own journey and our own considerations when thinking about this.
Definitely. And in a couple of months we will be that much wiser. I won't promise that we have achieved the ivory tower of a multi-cloud approach, but we will be on the way. We will have some ideas of how do we improve our process of moving towards that? What is it that we need? And are there considerations that are, holding us back? That might be very good considerations.
Awesome. Love it. I'm looking forward to that. And before we wrap up, I do have a couple of quick hits. So the first one, and just don't think too much about it. And if it's a short question, great. Or short answer, sorry. So first one, scalability is?
Scalability is extremely important for us.
Another one around kind of, is there a specific kind of resource, and by resource I mean book or podcast or, I don't know, blog or person out there that you would suggest anyone to follow or read? Or
I very much like Jeff Gerling's blog.
So if you're listening, go have a look. And what are the main things that he covers?
So I like that he covers things like automation, which is a subject near and dear to my heart, but also he tinkers with various things like Raspberry Pis and makes some mini projects, which are sometimes it's just fun to get invested in, technology that is a little bit of a toy, but still is something where you say, how can I apply this? Because it just opens up. Sure, it might be very different from my day-to-day work, but it still gives me a couple of ideas, maybe just keeps that enthusiasm for technology alive.
I don't follow the blog, so I think I'll have to do it myself as well. Last question. Which advice would you give to your younger self, or maybe to someone at starting a career in this area right now?
Failing is always a good way of learning things. And remember, it's always the most fun when it's burning.
Very good. Awesome, Usman. Thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for this episode of the Smooth Scaling Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing and perhaps share it with a friend or colleague. If you want to share any thoughts or comments with us, send them to smoothscaling@kiwit.com. This podcast is researched by Joseph Thwaites, produced by Perseo Mandilo, and brought to you by Kiwit, your virtual waiting room partner. I'm your host, Jose Quaresma. Until next time, keep it smooth, keep it scalable.